everybody always talked about me as if I did nothing after graduating from Harvard. And I would say, all right, I graduated from Harvard. What do I have to do anything else? Isn't that enough? Well, I make a joke of it, but after I brought my wife Anita Bullard, then finally Van Vactor, and my son David Landrus Van Vactor Jr., now Dr. Professor David Landrus Van Vactor Jr., to Chicago, where I took over my grandfather's business, Spring Packing Corporation, because my uncle had left it in a crisis, forced to pay back rents that he had taken by using our factory in Hammond, Indiana, for his own business, later which became Landrus Industries. I've already told some of this on YouTube. So we were in Chicago for a year and a half. And basically, I was in charge of the business. We had a general manager, his name was Niederreiter, which means underwriter. And we lived in Menominee and Sedgwick, in Old Town, near Lincoln Park. I've already said this on the YouTube. And Anita and Davy and I moved back east to Highland Park, New Jersey, across the Raritan from New Brunswick. I've already talked about that. Or going to New York, let's say, to the party at Ingram Fox's, meeting other people like John Cullum in New York City, and other people like John Watts, the composer. At this time, Anita had done her graduate work, and she had a long paper to write on Ulysses of James Joyce, but she was so depressed she couldn't get it done. So she begged me to let her go back to Paris, where she spent her junior year abroad, having several love affairs at that time with boys her age from Harvard that she knew that she ran into there. And she had had a good year, hard work. She's a great student, all A student by Beta Kappa. Her musical talent and the talents were limited. She tried to get her piano skills back when she was in Knoxville, but didn't go very far with that. She tried guitar, and then finally she ends up being a very good banjo player. Excuse me. So we got her tickets flying from Idlewild Airport, which is now JFK, to Paris from the northeast coast of America, across the Atlantic to Paris. She rested there about 6 weeks before, after having had correspondence with her former Shakespeare professor, Frank Kermode. She got to London. They had their rendezvous, and before one knew it, they were shacking up. And trouble is, he also was diddling around some other girl he knew. So she didn't have a very nice and secure place to stay until much later, when I think she stayed in the house he shared with his wife Maureen in Dulwich. which Pat and Jean Goodhart had rented when they were during their year in Paris for Jean Goodhart's Fulbright or Guggenheim, I don't know which, grants. At any rate. So Davy and I were abandoned. Anita didn't even know where the public school Davy had been going in 5th grade was, because I had the care of Davy. I had total care of him, and later would have custody of him. So here we are, coping with the fact that basically my marriage is over, my wife is now in a love relationship with another man, and I'm a cuckold. I should have had horns growing out on my top of my forehead. All this was very painful, but I got through it. I did get through it. When I was in California trying to make a movie with my sister, I got a call from her, as I would periodically, that they had been intimate. So I knew that, I had to bear that. Fortunately, I had her cousin, Catherine Ross, who had been a star of The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman, to sort of focus on. And I go out early in the morning from 904 Phyllis Avenue, next to Doheny Drive, go out to Pacific Palisades because Trina Ross would be exercising her horse out there, and I thought I could run into her, and I'd ask people on the road, have you seen a young woman riding a certain kind of horse? And I tried to call her. She was very hard to reach. Finally, I got her to come in and to Raven's house, and so I remember her coming in to see me. She didn't really have any time. She had obviously other boyfriends, and soon she would be hooked up with a cameraman named Conrad something. And I think she finally married to Sam Elliott, and I don't know who she's married to now. Maybe still him. That's Catherine Ross, who was in a big series of sort of Dallas style of TV series. Something's a landing, I don't know. Real Hollywood trash. Anyway, I found other women in Los Angeles. Easy to pick up. I sometimes use Davy as a decoy. They'd have a daughter with them, and maybe arrange for the two kids to play together, so I get to know the mother. And so it went. And soon, Anita was living full-time with Frank Kermode, who was teaching at London University at that time. He only had a master's degree from Manchester. And he had been editing Encounter magazine with Harold Lasky and Stephen Spender. When they found out there was money coming to the magazine to Encounter from the CIA, they resigned. It was a big crisis for them. And in the meantime, I finally decided I had to get a master's degree. I got my friends to get in touch with their friends. This was a group of Harvard professors, David Ferry, William Youngren, and others. who got in touch with Tom Wilcox at the University of Connecticut and arranged a teaching assistantship in English. And I moved from Knoxville, where I had gone back up to New Jersey, driving all my furniture in a rented truck, an 18-footer, with Davy along there, keeping me company as we drove up through Virginia, up the Shenandoah Valley, into Pennsylvania, and finally back to Newton, Massachusetts. It was Beaconwood Road, where Davy and I first lived. I moved all my nice furniture and carried it in myself. And then to Connecticut, to Storrs, Connecticut, where the University of Connecticut was. Davy went to second grade. He had a wonderful teacher named Mrs. Hardy. Did very well there. Then he went to third grade, within walking distance from our rented place in the something apartments. He had friends there, and had his little mountain bike, and then he had he would walk to school. Sometimes I would walk with him to make sure he was all right. It's just like about a 10-minute walk to go to third grade. After I got my master's degree, I had a job editing a whole series of lectures celebrating the 30s at the University of Connecticut. They had something like 25 people, editors of magazines, of a number of other things. They've written some histories, and they're doing really a history of the 30s, intellectual history of the 30s in America. Done at the University of Connecticut. It was in their special collections. I remember the head of special collections, I forget his name, he said, as we made our plans for what I was to do as the editor of this, his parting words was "Rots of Ruck," which I thought was funny. I didn't think it was funny at all. So finally, I finished brilliantly all of my graduate coursework. I had a favorite professor who was Kemple, whose daughter had her eye put out when a bottle of champagne, the bottle top ricocheted from the ceiling and put her eye out. George Hempel. The requirement was every graduate student of English had to take one course of linguistics. The course I took was mathematical linguistics, based on the work of Gottlieb Frege, which Hempel was writing a book on. I got an A in that, got an A in everything. I hadn't done enough Milton at Harvard, along with my Chaucer, Spencer, Old English poetry in translation, and complete Shakespeare and all that. So I did a course in Milton and did brilliantly. I remember one class I just read about reading a book about Albrecht Dürer by Panofsky, and I'd just been reading about the four temperaments or the moods, like melancholia and the others. There was some reference to it in class. I was studying with Irving Cummings, whose child was one of Davy's best friends. And I remember there was some mention of temperaments or mood changes or alchemy, and I had just read this, and so right off the top of my head in class, I did the whole psychology of the four temperaments, fresh in my mind. I was a big reader. I was a pretty good incipient scholar at that point. I was also finishing teaching my freshman English course, in which I did modern playwrights like by Bertolt Brecht, Mother's Courage. I did all the major plays. I had a good poetry anthology, good anthology of short stories, which I taught and I got my students to write papers about. I would finish all that up, and then the next thing we know, Davy and I are packing up all our furniture, paintings, going back up to the Cambridge area. My girlfriend had gone to teach at Notre Dame. She had not yet finished her PhD, but all the coursework, she'd done brilliantly. Was later to publish a book on Sylvia Plath, which had been her dissertation. She was brilliant and about 6 feet tall. And I loved her. I was ready to marry her and convert to Catholicism. She was a practicing Roman Catholic. I would have gladly converted from American Episcopal Church to that, but then I had this place at Harvard Divinity School as a special student to study the New Testament and other things at pastoral council. So we were on our way back to Cambridge area. And we lived on Beaconwood Road. I've already mentioned that just a couple of seconds ago. And we arrived there with the furniture, get our apartment, all the furniture out and in place, paintings up on the wall. I had some sculptures, I had some pop art paintings that I liked, and a few of my own pieces. Not much of my own. I'd sort of been discouraged by painting. I was painting some abstractions in Holland Park. And Anita squelched it. She said I had no sense of color, which is absolute nonsense. I have a very good sense of color. But as usual, the bitch critic put me down. I think she was always really secretly jealous of me for my visual arts talents, my musical talents, of which she had very little herself. Only finally she did learn to play the banjo very well. She became a collector of Appalachian Mountain folklore music. And of course, she was always a great student. Though she never finished her PhD, she did teach at Columbia and at Cambridge University for several years because she was hooked up with Frank Kermode, who was later knighted by the Queen of England, as well as my friend Stephen Spender, Sir Stephen and Sir Frank. And then one could call Anita Lady Kermode, but I don't think anybody ever did. Or Lady Anita. I don't want to make fun of somebody who's in my family and my granddaughter, my favorite granddaughter, Amanda's grandmother. So I will desist for the moment. No more about the abandonment of David and Davy by Anita Bullard Van Vactor. I now sign off. Thank you very much for your patience. Hope to no longer have to bother you with my rattling on about the past. This will be on YouTube under Nicholas Van Vactor. If I sound bitter, maybe I am.